Hello everyone, my name is Catherine Enright. I'm the Volunteer Manager at Sydney Harbour Federation Trust. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and owners of the lands and waters on which we all stand today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to today's DigiTalk. The Harbour Trust is offering a series of these, so be sure to go to harbourtrust.gov.au to watch all the recordings and see what's coming up next. Now, today's presenter. Professor Dennis Foley is a valued member of the Business, Government and Law faculty at the University of Canberra, working at the university since 2018. His main research focus is towards the emerging discipline of Indigenous enterprise and entrepreneurship. Dennis's career within the tertiary education sector began researching an Indigenous career and employment strategy at Griffith University, followed by the establishment of the first Australian Indigenous degree program in contemporary Australian Indigenous art. Several teaching appointments followed, including at the University of Queensland, the Australian Catholic University, the Universities of Queensland, Sydney, Queensland University of Technology, and the University of Hawaii, as well as Swinburne University. Prior to joining the tertiary education sector, Dennis held middle to senior management positions within the banking and finance sector. Professor Foley is a Fulbright Scholar and Dual Endeavour Fellow. His publications focus on social inclusion and cross-disciplines, such as Indigenous literature, Indigenous history, Indigenous studies, business management, and Indigenous epistemology and pedagogy. In addition, Dennis has been a member of the Harbour Trust Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Group since 2018. Dennis identifies as Koori. His matrilineal connection is Gaymaragal of northern Sydney, and his patrilineal connection is to the Wiradjuri people of the Turon River region. He is active within the Indigenous community and Indigenous business associations that include the New South Wales Indigenous Chamber of Commerce. He has also received several ministerial appointments to state and federal advisory committees and currently researches in Canada, Ireland, and across Aboriginal Australia. Now, a summary of today's presentation. What the Colonists Never Knew paints a vivid picture of what it was like to grow up Aboriginal in Sydney, alongside the colonists, from 1788 to the present. Dennis, the grandson of Clarice Melinda Lauer, the last practicing matriarch of the Gaymaragal clan, was immersed in cultural knowledge and law from an early age. Through his eyes, we see a Sydney of totemic landscapes, resonating with ceremonial sites and ancestral activity, song lines and walking tracks, habitat caves and middens, and share memories of what has been lost. Through the story so generously told, we may reflect on what it means to be a stolen child and one of the silent generations, and to fight to safeguard culture and identity. We can sense the responsibility of being the senior Gaymaragal of the last of the storytellers, and the urgency to document and share the knowledge bestowed on him by generations of his family. And now I'd like to hand over to Dennis.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. Thanks for the introduction. We're here today to talk a little bit about the recent book that I put out with Peter Reid, What the Colonists Never Knew. And what I want to do is just go over some of the country in Sydney and give you an indication of some of the Aboriginal background and law. But before I start, it's always important that we consider the welcome to country. I'm currently on Ngunnawal land, but my country, of course, is Gumaragal, and the raven signifies my totem, or guna. So in my language, Gumadabianga, Gumadawaranga, Maramrong, Tianaganaga, Maramrong, Bayalia, Gumaragal, Guripenda. It's just a welcome to country into our land. For all those people living on the North Shore, may you be able to walk and talk and traverse that country in peace. It's also a part of the celebration for NAIDOC Week, and this is pretty important between the 8th and 15th of November. And this year the title is Always Was, Always Will Be, which fits into the discussion today and the book, really, because it always was Aboriginal land, and it always will be. No matter how much concrete and bricks get thrown around, it still is Aboriginal land. It's the foundation of the country. And also because the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust is predominantly based on military land, it has an incredible Aboriginal history as well. In fact, on North Head, we had several men who died during the Spanish flu. So they'd survived the Somme, they'd survived World War I, only to come into Sydney in transport ships to die in Manly Cove and to be buried on Carrigal, which is North Head. So, and also my own family. My grandfather served in Assam, my father served in New Guinea, and I also wore a uniform, and my mother's eldest brother served in Korea. So we have a strong tradition of Aboriginal men serving in the military. The book was launched on the 12th of August, and it's been very successful. It's actually quite humbling the way the sales have gone. They're far better than we expected. And the lovely Margaret O'Neill did the launch for us, together with a few other guest people, including Susan Coombs, an established friend in Sydney. And I thank the National Museum of Australia as the publisher. You couldn't ask for a better publisher. They've been absolutely wonderful. So the two villains or colleagues that wrote the book is Peter Reid on the left of the screen, and of course myself smiling on the right. Now, a lot of the book was conceived and written in their heads in that tinny going around the Cowan and places like Collacanny Creek, taking Peter around the places of my youth where my uncles used to fish and where my family members lived right up until the 1950s and also the 1960s. So we still had Aboriginal people living in what's called Greenbrier National Park, and they survived and they survived well up until then. In fact, the camp at Narrabeen, which I'll talk about in a minute, it didn't disappear until 1959 when it was bulldozed by the authorities to build the sports area. This is the back cover of the book. Now, what's really interesting there, you'll see me in a habitation cave, and what is really interesting about this cave, it's one of the few caves that are left where the archaeologists haven't dug over. So it's wonderful. It's almost a sacred place because a lot of our caves, the middens and the basic floor of the cave have been dug over and extensively destroyed. So this is one place that is still there. It's still in its pristine form, and I hope I can take my family and my future family to continue to go there on a regular basis. We had some wonderful comments. Bruce Pascoe was a supporter of the mesmerising Reid, and a good friend of mine, Melissa Lashenko, she said the book was dazzling, revelation. I heard it before. And Heather Goodall, fantastic, non-Aboriginal, but she writes in Aboriginal history. She really enjoyed it as well, and is a good friend in the work that we've done in the George's River area. To give you an idea of where the book covers, it covers not so much the Brisbane water area, it covers up the Hawkesbury a little bit, but mainly around the northern suburbs, Dural, Hornsby Heights, and of course the Lane Cove and the Lane Cove River. And Peter does include a little bit of Castle Hill Way and with the Darrick. But I predominantly talk about the Lane Cove River catchment area, right up to the hilltop along the Cowan, and then all those spaces in between. Some of the best real estate in Sydney. That's my mother's land. That's my grandmother's land. That's a matrilineal line of the Gumaragal. And within there we have 8 clans, 6 clans we still remember the names: the Garigal, the Gatley, the Gamai, the Turramurragal, the Burraburragal, which a lot of people call the Walnalla, and of course the Camaragal. And they make up the 6 major clans. And then we have the Burrigal, the Canigal, and a heap of other smaller clans that are sub-clans. So if you could think of the 3 tiers of Australian government, the federal government, the state government, and local government, the Gumaragal is the federal government. The 6 major clans that I just read out, Turramurragal, Burrigal, the Gatley, the Gamai, and the Camaragal, etc., they make up your state government, and then the Canigal, the Burrigal, and the smaller clans, they make up the local government. So that's how it works. It works on a structured system. So when you get confused by names, it actually isn't confusing when you understand how it all fits in. This is the centre of our universe, and it's a totemic landscape in many ways, and it's actually formed by several lakes, several individual lakes. So with the rise and fall of the oceans and with the ice age, this is an area of pristine fresh water originally before the salt water flowed in. And I'll talk a little bit about it, and I'll talk about the naming. You can see just how names are incorrectly recorded. And of course, down at the bottom right-hand corner, we have the Sydney Sports Academy, and that's where our last camp was. I can vividly remember going there in my childhood up to 1959. And I can remember going there when the tin was just laying there smouldering with the ashes of the fires, and it had been bulldozed, and our old people were taken away in the back of an old Bedford truck, and they were taken to Ruby Hill, which was quite sad. It was heartbreaking. To give you an idea about Narrabeen, the early surveyor James Meehan back in 1814 called it Narrabang Lagoon, and that is pretty close to the correct pronunciation of it. And there's a language group which calls it the source of fresh water, which is absolute rubbish. And Captain Henry Reynolds, our first leader, supposedly took his family there, and they were massacred by an attack of escaped convicts. And you'll find, if you read through this, you'll find that Henry Reynolds did Henry Reynolds that was quoted in the first fleet. David Patrick and John Williams in 2017 disproved it, and they showed that Captain Henry Reynolds didn't exist, and that the Narrabeen massacre was actually false news. So this is one of your first cases of fake news. So that gives you an idea how Aboriginal names and Aboriginal history quite often can be the exotic memory of some people who like making stuff out of nothing. But anyway, Narrabeen, where does it come from? Narrabang is two words. It's two words that are put together rather crudely in the English language. Naragay is a degree of relationship in ceremony, and Narangarang is blood in ceremony. Now, you've got to realise that the whole area around Narrabeen Lakes is ceremonial land where there were 7 hills which are linked to women's knowledge, and it's also linked to young boys' knowledge. So every male is actually a female until they come to puberty, and of course Narang is small. So when you put the two together, Narang and Banarang, you get Narabang, which was later translated in English or English sites as Narrabeen, because bang is pronounced bean. So Narrabeen, Narrabang. So Narrabang with the silent G before the B is a place of ceremony for youth, or re-ceremony for those in training. Because you remember that when you first go through training at, say, the age of 8, you'll go through again at the age of 10, maybe 12, 14, 16, 18, and on it goes. So you go through training continuously. And a lot of our puberty sites are also sites for adults. And I cheekily say what the colonists didn't know. Why didn't they ask us? So we have the swan upturn, which is also another cheeky thing about the colonists. But when we look at Mulga, now we have a song called Nuttly Bee, and Gooly Yelling. And it's the song of the black swan. The black swan flies basically from where you have Mascot Airport. Mascot Airport was once a huge, big swamp and meeting ground. It was where a lot of ceremonial grounds existed in Maroubra and Coogee, and they were linked up to that country. And the young women would come down from the north, and they would go down through the Black Swan flight. And the Black Swan flies from here all the way up to the north coast, up past Grafton in the lake systems, and consequently the Black Duck flies from down at Lakes Entrance, past Eden, from Maroubra, all the way along the lake systems on the coast. So we have the Black Swan songline, which goes north, which is linked to women. We have the Black Duck, which is linked down south, and they all come back and they all join in the Mascot area, which is no surprise, because if you remember that recently there was an anthropological find where there was thousands and thousands of Aboriginal stone tools, and they couldn't understand why the meeting place was there. What the colonists didn't know, all they had to do was ask the local Aboriginal person, and they would have told them. Now, I want you to consider the shape of the lake, and you can see why it's a totemic landscape for us, and why it's closely related with the swan. You don't have to use much of your imagination to see that here we have the swan. But what's really interesting when we go back there, this area here, which is where the old tram station was, well, the tram station is actually there, but just south there used to be a shed for the tram station, and then down below that there is where the ambulance station is. That's where the water actually used to flood out. So in times of high rain, this is where it flooded out. So we have all these stories. And that's where the swan pulls its head in and slips. So, it's not hard to envisage what this country means to us. So there's your black swan, that's Narrabeen. Now, the next totemic landscape, which we talk about greatly in the book, is Karrangal. Now, you know this as North Head, but Karang is the word for pelican, and Gel or Gal or Gull, G-E-L, G-A-L or G-U-L, means land. So this is pelican land. This is the totemic landscape, and I'll show you in a minute why it's a totemic landscape and why it's so valuable to us. Now, bearing in mind, I talked about songlines. From this side here, we have a songline that goes due west, which goes over the Blue Mountains. We have the Black Swan songline, which goes due north. We have the Black Duck, which goes due south. And we also have the Warrane, the Wild Dog, which goes up here to the Upper Hunter Valley, to Mount Tenterfield, up through southwest Queensland around to Attila and in the Northern Territory, and then from the Attila it jumps to Alice Springs to Dingo Rock, and then from Dingo Rock it goes up along the range, and then from the range it goes down to the Alders and to eventually goes to the Inland Sea, which you call Lake Eyre. And this is actually where the pelican flies. Now, when the pelican first went to the Inland Sea to have a chum, because that's where it breeds and has a chum and populates, and so do some of the other little birds like the cormorant, the large cormorant, they'll go there. Now, it swings around to the south and it comes around through Adelaide, down to the south, through the coastal areas, through the Gunnitjmara area, Mount Eccles, and then comes up roughly around Geelong and comes up the hills, and then comes straight up to Sydney Harbour. So we effectively have 5 songlines which emanate from this site. This is the most important religious site on the eastern seaboard. Now, if you can imagine when the water was gone, this is actually a longland. This is one huge piece of sandstone. Where Manly Beach is, that beach didn't exist. That spur wasn't there. That's all sand that's filled in since the colonists came there. So this was one huge island, and that's why it's so important. So if we see the shape of a dead pelican, we can see, if we go back to that slide, here is the tail, here is the right wing, here is the left wing, here is the head, which forms a little manly. So here we go. So we've got the right wing, which goes out towards the sewage works, the tail, which is the Fairfax Wharf, the left wing, which is down near the quarantine station, and of course Little Manly. Now, Fairy Bower, if you see a pelican has a little crest of feathers on its roof, on its head. Now, Fairy Bower, the crest is turned the other way, because when the pelican lay down and died, the crest turned around. And here we have the 2 bays and Collins Beach in around the neck area. So you can see it's a pelican, and it comes from that totemic landscape. It's probably seen better here with the right wing, the tail, the left wing, and then the head, which comes around there in Collins Beach in the its neck. So, yeah, quite an amazing place. Very, very spiritual. It is not a deaf island. It is not a burial island, as some people will tell you. And it's definitely not anything to do with whales. Whale mythology comes into it, but it is not associated with whales in its totemic landscape. It is purely a pelican. That's why it's called Parangal. Parangal means pelican, pelican place, because it is a gigantic pelican. And it's also, because it's a pelican, it can fly right up in the sky. So this is a place where, without copying the song, this is a place where the stairway to heaven, where our people of high degree, could actually go into the heavens and then traverse and come back. So that's one of our beliefs. So the pelican has that ability to uplift men, take them and women, and take them into the sky. Now, in the Sydney Basin, we also have beautiful remnants of our culture. And this is a portal. Now, recently I found one along the Lane Cove River, which is a very important portal. So, the red rump frog, or red rump toad. This one here is a woman, and she has to the left-hand side, her arm goes up here, and she's dropped her baby, and her baby is laying there. She holds a quill in her arm, and this stone is a portal stone, and it actually signifies a woman. And if you can think of that TV show called Stargate, and when you walk through the portal there, your body changed in its molecular structure. It is something totally different. The same for us. When we go into a site, it's very, very important for us to go forward with this and speak to the spirits, and then when you come out, you do the same thing. And that way, you are protected whilst you're in the site. Otherwise, bad things can happen to you. And on that same site, and some of the things that we associate with the book, which we talk about in the book, is some of our middens and some of our engraving areas. And we have the giant catfish to the bottom here. We have one of the shark engravings. We have the penguin engraving. Why the penguin engraving is really important for us is that in our beliefs, when the penguin disappears from Sydney Harbour and from Port Hacking, we will disappear as a race too. So you can see the penguin numbers are very low. So therefore, obviously, our figures are very low. So when the penguins disappear, we're in trouble. We will know with this race. This is the engraving of the large catfish. And whilst I don't talk about this in the book much, we do talk about some of the saltwater stories. The large catfish was a massive catfish, and some of you have probably seen the Ganges catfish and maybe the Nile River catfish, which were quite large, and they would take a human being, particularly a small child, so would this fella. Now, these did live in Narrabeen lakes, in the lake area. They also live in Sydney Harbour, and it's one of our stories of taking something, of a large animal that would take human beings. So small children report about this in the river. And it's also a training site telling us about the kangaroo. You can see the spear has gone into the heart, into the lungs, which causes a quick death of the kangaroo. It's a male kangaroo. And one of the great myths about Sydney, and I do talk about harvesting animals and husbandry. So, we did not just go out and kill any kangaroo. You kill the males who were no longer mating, or you kill the males who were not a dominant male and couldn't get into the pod. So you'd have a mob of kangaroos where you'd have a dominant male, his children, his male sons, who would eventually take over, and you'd have all the breeding females. You never took a breeding female, you only took a male who was a non-breeder, and you can see the footsteps here where the novice would be shown how to walk up down in to get close to the kangaroo. But it was also a very important engraving to show the anatomical parts of the kangaroo, which part, who got what. Now, the hunter would, if they're lucky, would get the flaps and maybe some of the intestines. The rump would always go to the mother-in-law or to mother if the mother-in-law wasn't close. The tail was usually for the older women and children. The back strap usually went to the older men, and particularly the head and the neck would go to the older men. So the most inferior part of the kangaroo was the belly strap and maybe the front legs, and that's where the hunter would probably get. So it's important to make sure that the mother or the mother-in-law got the best part of it, and the children also got the second best part of it. So it's an anatomical image as well. So it's used for many things. And this actually is not a kangaroo, it's actually a short tail, which is a wallaby. It shows it's going to kill a wallaby. On other sites, we actually have a kangaroo. So but this is what the colonists did know. And this is an interesting image because it's an image of the bronze whaler. It's an image of the harbour whaler. Now, the harbour whaler is a different shark. It's also an image of the round-faced shark, which is several other species of sharks, and it can even include the striped shark, which you would know as the tiger shark. And it's a pregnant shark, and even the stories of the grey nurse are actually told with the same image. So this image is used for several different stories and several different applications of the story to life. Now, if you were a young male, say 14 years of age, this would be the story of the bull shark. And what's really interesting about it is you taught about sexual abuse, you taught about rape, and because the bull shark came about from rape. And several young girls were stolen, and they were sexually abused, and when they rescued them, they were pregnant, and as they paddled across what we call now called the Spit, in that area of Middle Harbour, the canoe overturned, the girls fell out, and from the stomachs burst the bull shark. And from that day to this, the bull shark has attacked us. And this is why you've got to be very careful in around dark water or in Sydney Harbour, particularly in some of the rivulets like Rainbow River, etc. So the bull shark, that's one story, and there's many other stories that come with this, so it's not just the one. This is Garaglan, which is Biami's son. In our beliefs, Biami is a woman, and Garaglan is noted, you can see he's got toes here, and he's got a clutch here. He's male, he's got his warrior belt on. We wore a belt of kangaroo sinew and wallaby hide wrapped around our stomachs very tight, and it goes up your stomach and protects your middle area against clubs or boomerangs when you're in battle. He's got his spear thrower, his warmer there, and you can see he's there. And he's actually protecting these indentations of the back there, which are fonts. They're paint-up fonts. So they're still being used. So our culture's not dead. We're still using these sites, and this is quite an interesting site, an interesting place. Now, this is the little demon that raped the young girls, stole the young girls. And they used to steal our girls, and they would abuse them, and then when they're pregnant, they would then eat them. Now, these little fellows, we call them little hairy men. You'll notice in Indonesia recently they found a heap of bones, and they refer to them as the hobbits. We still believe these things exist, and they are alive in early parts of New Guinea and different parts of Indonesia. And they used to exist up around the eastern seaboard of Australia. Some people believe they're still there. Very, very secretive. They smell. They cover themselves in excrement, and they have long hair. That's the main little pyramid, and very, very secretive. And yeah, they're a pretty horrible person, and they're primitive and they're piggy-sized. So that's part of the horror story. So what the comics didn't know. And this, of course, is Biami. This is our God. This is our creator. And you can see that she has a wonderful image there. And this is a training site, so it gives you the story back there. And this is probably one of the most important things, one of the most important engravings that still exists in Sydney. And it actually tells of 12,500 years of weather patterns. You have Tagani, time of fire and time of cold. And so this would be told about ice ages, but they're most important. It'll also be told about menstrual cycle. So it's important for the boys to understand the menstrual cycle. This will tell it. But with the menstrual cycle, you also got all the different phases of the moon and when the fish are available, because the fish are only available at certain times. Now, that image, so that's our weather image, and that you can soon see how these two link in. Now, this is courtesy of Auntie Fran Bodkin, Auntie Fran Bodkin, B-O-D-K-N. And this is her depiction of our weather cycle, which is exactly the same as the one that exists for us. So you can see there's 6 seasons. What the Europeans didn't know, what the comics didn't know, is Sydney and the Sydney Valley has 6 seasons. It doesn't have 4. And this is why they have lots of problems with their agriculture, growing things. So we have 6 seasons, and we quite often do depict it as warm and wet, hot and dry, and the blooming of the flower. And the one I always love is the echidna starts its gathering in July, June, July. The echidna starts getting together ready for mate, and the lyrebird builds its mound in August. When it's cold and windy, the lyrebird gets its new plumage then, so when it's ready to mate, it's got its mound built and has its new plumage. So as soon as September comes around, bang, it's ready to mate. And the gathering of flying foxes in September, October, because the flying foxes have got a belly full of sweet nectar, and it meets sweet, and it's good. So it's closely linked to all the animals, and also our gathering, our harvesting, and our farming. This is another site in Sydney Harbour, and it's a favourite site of ours because it's a ledge site, and because it's almost solid rock underneath, the archaeologists haven't been able to dig it up very much. So it's still not pristine, but it's still there. There's still light fires, there's still smoke, and it was a habitation cave, and it was used on a regular basis. And what's interesting, where the smoke is coming up from where the log is, that is where the women used to sleep, and the men used to sleep back towards the front of the camera on a couple of rock shelves a little bit higher. So this was a child and women's, a family habitation cave. So these would have been lined with leaves and grasses, predominantly bracken, to soften the ground, make it very comfortable, and it was a great place to camp in summer because it's right cool, and smoking fires would keep the water away. What the colonists didn't know, we still use these places, we still stay in them, we still camping, not as much. Now this is the red Angophora, what we would call apple gum, and what's predominantly important about this, you see the leaf or the branches are horizontal. This is where the army sits, and she watches over us. So our God, our Creator, she can be there, she can watch over us. We believe she's there all the time. We never know when she comes or goes. And the most important thing is the buttress roots. Now, what's important about this tree? Because of the horizontal branches, when you die, the body would be placed there overnight, and the spirit would come back into the tree, would go up through the branches and the dark night. Either that night or many nights later, would escape through the leaves into the heavens. And then vice versa, when a child is to be conceived and the woman was to take on a child, the woman would sit on the buttress roots. Now she's already copulated with a male partner, but to take on the spirit of the child comes from the heart of the, it doesn't come from them. It comes from the place. So through the shooting star, the spirit is brought back to the earth, it comes back to the earth through the branches and back up to the womb. As the woman struggles with the buttress root. And there's several of these still around Sydney. We've started them up again recently, and I think I talk about that in the book. We've had 11 children doing today, 10 males and 1 female, all healthy, and to Indigenous and non-Indigenous schools. These girls that have been children. So, there's a little bit of positive thinking out there, but is there something greater? Now, this is a picture of me a few years ago, a little bit younger. We still teach in the schools, we still get out there, we still run our culture. We probably don't teach as many of our own people, sadly, because the impact of TV, culture, internet and all those things, not many of our youth come to, but we always try and get involved in non-Indigenous youth teaching, which is really important. And most of all, we still get out there and shake a leg and still do ceremony, which is really important. That's an important part of our culture. We're still there, we're still active right around for the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust areas and for Sydney Harbour. And these are the things, not only the colonists didn't know it in 1890, in 1990, in 2020, which is quite sad. So that's the book. If you buy it, I hope you enjoy it. And it's written from the heart. And as I said, I've told stories about my family, about my own growing up, and people read is put evidence to see similar stories from other different groups and different people. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you. You get a call. Goodbye.
So thank you very much for taking the time this week, Dennis, to give us that presentation. And I know that book, as you say, is available for purchase at the moment. And I think, Dennis, you have said that the content that you talked about today is in the book. Is that correct?
Yeah, the majority of it's in the book, yeah. I'm not sure how much I talk about Narrabeen Lakes. I know I had touched on Narrabeen. I'll probably give a little bit more detail in the presentation today than what I've done in the book.
Okay. All right.
Definitely current book, yeah.
Sure. So if people do want to expand on the topic, please be sure to buy Dennis's book. So, Dennis, finally, I'd like to say thank you so much for your presentation today again. And I'd like to let everybody know, actually, this is our last presentation of the year for DigiTalks, but we'll certainly be back next year. We look forward to seeing you again next year. Now, if you'd like to see this presentation again and many other of our presentations, they're actually on our website. So please go to harbourtrust.gov.au and follow the prompts, and you'll find us there on the archive page in the DigiTalk section. So once again, Dennis, thank you so much, and we will leave you for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you.